Well, joining us now is the Foreign Secretary, William Hague. Thank you for coming in, Foreign Secretary.
Thank you.
Let's start with that torture victim. This is still happening, and if engagement is working, it should not be happening.
Well, we're not saying engagement yet has worked in all its objectives. Terrible things have happened in Sri Lanka, and actually I pay tribute to Channel 4 and everything that it has done to expose some of what happened in the conflict in Sri Lanka, and many aspects of their human rights record have got worse in recent times, according to the United Nations.
Well, it's interesting you use the phrase in the Telegraph today. You say you do talk indeed about the awful numbers of people who've been killed, many of them innocent civilians, and then you say appalling alleged violations of human rights, but they're more than alleged. There were violations.
Oh, many of these
are
very, you have shown on Channel 4, they're very well substantiated allegations. Not every allegation may be correct, but clearly many of them are.
But it's 4 years since the war, so what makes you think you can start to change this regime now?
Well, there are really two reasons that we've taken this decision to go to the Commonwealth Conference in what is always a classic dilemma in foreign policy. Do you engage, do you go to a country and argue with people there, or do you try to isolate them? And there's a legitimate point of view on both sides of that argument. We've decided we should go there for two reasons. One is this is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. It is about many more things than what happens in Sri Lanka. It only happens every 2 years. It would be gravely damaging to the Commonwealth if Britain, that was the source of the Commonwealth, wasn't there at those meetings, and there are many things we need to discuss. But the second reason is relevant to Sri Lanka.
Just deal with the first one before you give me the second one, because the first one, surely, if you have the great display of a third of the world's leaders going into Colombo, shaking hands with a man who does stand accused of very serious war crimes by the UN Human Rights Commission, etc., you are, in a sense, turning the page and saying, welcome back into the family of nations.
Well, we're not turning the page. I mean, that's the second part of the answer. From Britain, we are not turning the page. But the Commonwealth took the decision years ago to go to Sri Lanka. And there has been no widespread opinion in the Commonwealth that this summit could be moved or held somewhere else. Most Commonwealth countries have remained committed to that and would go to this conference despite all the arguments that we have over it. And so that's not something that Britain controls. You know, this is the Commonwealth, it's not the Empire. We don't decide on our own where these meetings take place. But the second point, the second argument for going is that you can produce things by engaging, by being involved. The Prime Minister will go to the north of the country. No head of government has been there to the north since 1948 in Sri Lankan independence before. That will make an impact. I will be holding events in Sri Lanka on sexual violence in conflict, meeting NGOs, promoting reconciliation. We believe that that will have a better impact than sitting in London and not being there.
Well, give me some tangible outcome that you expect, you demand to see as a result of having been there.
Well, there are many things that we want to see in Sri Lanka.
Well, what about this inquiry, for example? Is it just a Sri Lankan one, or do you want an international, just as the UN has said, an independent international investigation for war crimes? Well,
the UN, we want what the UN has said, an independent, thorough and credible investigation.
International.
And the position of the UN Commissioner on Human Rights is if the Sri Lankans don't set up such an investigation...
Well, they did, and of course it's just a self-serving nothing.
But not independent and credible and thorough. And if they don't do that, then of course there is such a strong case for an international inquiry.
So is there tonight a strong case for an independent international investigation into war crimes in Sri Lanka?
There will always be a strong case for that, given what has happened and given what you have demonstrated. What we are calling for is an independent, thorough, credible investigation. And if the Sri Lankans don't set that up...
There's a big word missing there, international. International.
Then, if they don't set that up, then we and the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world, of course, will want to support an international investigation.
Isn't this the flaw in your argument? Because if you'd used conditionality, if you'd said, we will indeed come to Colombo, we will attend the Commonwealth Conference, but if you don't set up such an inquiry, then we won't, and you'd have had 6 months to play. Now you go there, how long are you going to give him before you're going to say, well, I'm sorry, you haven't set one up, we're going to go for it.
Well, the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights has said that if they haven't done that by March, then the case is going to greatly be strengthened for an international investigation. And it is I think we do have to work with the UN on this. But you ask about the last 6 months. Actually, if we had said 6 months ago we are not going, we would have been isolated from this argument and our opinions discounted. So you can, of course, argue these things either way, but we, the government, have to make a judgment. Our judgment is that if we stayed away, it would damage the Commonwealth without changing things in Sri Lanka.
Well, now, the UN Human Rights Commissioner, Navi Pillay, has complained of two things. One, that the regime is becoming autocratic, that it's sliding downhill, it's not going uphill, it's not improving, that, in fact, matters are getting worse. And the thing she's really particularly angry about is that people the UN speak to then get molested by the Sri Lankan authorities.
Yes.
Now, when Mr. Cameron goes to the north, how are you going to be able to protect the people he speaks to? How are the people who speak to you going to be protected?
Well, of course, we can't do that in another country. What it can do is shine the spotlight on these things. The whole world will want to know if somebody speaks to our Prime Minister in the north of the country and then they disappear afterwards. And that will shine a very terrible spotlight on what has happened in Sri Lanka. And Navi Pillay, I discussed this with her yesterday. She visited me yesterday and we talked about these things. But she also believes that she has done in herself in going there and debating these things with them. That's what Navi Pillay, has done. And that's what she expects the rest of us to do.
But you know, in diplomacy, inevitably you look at parallels. You look, where else have we actually tried to change a leader's behavior? Indeed, we did it with Gaddafi. He was very bad. He had atomic weapons. He was a grim force. And we decided we'd embrace him, we'd engage him. We did. And then eventually we had to bomb him and kill him. And that was a pretty disastrous operation. Can you think of another moment when it's really been possible to turn somebody accused of massacring 40,000 people of his own people, 40,000 of his own people, and we've turned him into somebody that we can do business with?
Countries do change, and I'm in no way underestimating the challenge and the scale of abuses and human rights abuses in this case. As I say, do countries sometimes change through positive engagement and pressure from the rest of the world? Yes, they do. Burma, in recent times, of course, we have led the way among European countries in visiting the regime in Burma, accepting their sincerity in wanting to change and encouraging them to do so. Have terrible human rights abuses been committed there? Yes, they have. Well, but it hasn't stopped us engaging to some good effect. And so I think we have to try that with Sri Lanka and acknowledge that there are some positive things they have done as well.
One last question on Sri Lanka, and this is a very big one, because your passion has been to move towards an international treaty on defending women in war, particularly preventing rape. An international protocol.
Yes.
And preventing rape by military and the rest of it, and using it as a weapon of war. And there is no place, well, with the exception of the Congo, but basically Sri Lanka's record, the military raping civilians in both the war and since the war, has been appalling. How can you easily go there, believing in what you want, knowing that that's what they do?
Well, as you say, I do feel passionately about this, and I'm doing a lot of work on this globally. I will be holding an event about this in Sri Lanka, and I'll be arguing to the Commonwealth foreign ministers that the whole of the Commonwealth has got to
Will you address the issue with your foreign minister
Yes.
opposite number, specifically?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I do this with foreign ministers all over the world, whatever their
And you'll
record.
produce evidence of what they're up to?
Yes, absolutely I will, including, no doubt, evidence from Channel 4. And I will be arguing to the whole of the Commonwealth that it has to support our efforts on preventing sexual violence and conflict. I wouldn't be able to do that if I wasn't at the meeting. And that is why we have to be at that meeting, not sitting in London isolating ourselves from the argument.
Well, now, security, much in the air. We've had the 3 security bosses out. We'll be reporting them later in the programme. But there's been a very interesting development of late. Not only Angela Merkel's bugged phone and the rest of it, but the fact that we had a listening post which really offended the Germans. Why do we need to spy on the Germans?
Well, that's a bit that you're assuming something there in the
Well, do we have a listening post?
Some of these newspaper reports are very speculative, let me say that.
We've never had an ambassador called in Germany since the end of the Second World War. Now it's happened, and it's happened right now over this listening process?
Well, as you know, and as people well understand, I do not confirm or deny allegations, things that are said about our intelligence agencies. That's for very, very good reasons. Even when there are things that are not true at all,
but you can
we
tell
can't say so because we would be challenged in the same way about things that are true and are in the interests of this country.
But you can tell me at least, have you read Angela Merkel's phone log?
I certainly wouldn't be. I cannot start confirming or denying such things. We work very closely with our partners. We work in which include Germany, of course. We work in a very strong legal framework in this country, as I think the three agency chiefs illustrated very powerfully in their evidence today.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.